Russell this month. Jay is a musician and poet and husband and father. A mutual friend suggested we had a lot in common, and Jacob would really get the levels and arcs of my book, The Divine Daughter. So we sent him a book, and he read it. Jacob has a series of videos on his channel called My Goddamn Garage, a mix of songs and sorting out ideas from inside a creative mind. I encourage you to go to his channel. I want to give one free copy of the audiobook version of my book and one free copy of the ebook version of the book through the Apple iBooks app to his viewers. So please, click on the link below to his channel. Now, after reading the book, Jacob suggested we talk. I was a bit nervous, thinking of where the conversation could go. But very quickly, it seemed like I could have gone to high school or college or university with him. As soon as we got the text settings sorted out, it seemed like we just jumped into conversation. Merrily, 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 merrily. We went from free speech and amplified media platforming to the neurotic fixations of comedians and Marshall McLuhan and Glenn Gould, to boxing and Carl Jung and feminism and daddy issues and Canadian poetic bar bands and the role of mystery and authority in metaphysical topics, and biblical fathers like Abraham and Jephthah and their children. Greta Thunberg and Carl Sagan showed up, surprisingly. It felt like we didn't talk about my book or about his videos so much directly, but circled around all of them and connected them. This may be because with creatives, well, it's all connected. It was truly incredible to have this moment with another mind so open to the power of associative thinking. No need to compete over conclusions, but taking up the fun of finding the right questions to ask. Timestamps are set up for topics below. I hope you have as much fun with this as we did, and I hope it gets you asking yourself better and better questions. Here's our conversation. I hope the first of more. Cheers.
Yeah, well, I remember when I used to be at a show or something and they'd let me have a microphone to get up there and say something. You know, maybe it was a spoken word, open mic kind of territory or something like that. One of the first things I'd always say when I got up there, be like, you really are trusting me to just use this microphone and just talk? You all have to listen to me now? This is insane. You shouldn't do this.
And have you vetted me? Have you? I haven't been tested here. I haven't been.
Well, and that is the weird thing about free speech, right? Is like everyone's like, oh, pro free speech when no one really gets to speak. And there's just a tiny amount of media organizations that own all the channels. And like, what are you going to do? Go down like in the 80s, but what are you going to do with your free speech? If you're not getting on TV or getting someone to publish your book, you're just the guy ranting down the street. But all of a sudden it means something when you have an internet, you know, because now anybody can say anything and maybe they don't have good things to say.
And you can put it out there without any real backing, without any real sort of check. And again, this is the human thing, right? Like the first impression, the immediate response gets the attention because we're immediate kind of, you know, we're immediate kind of people, or we're immediate species. And then when it comes back later, yeah, by the way, you know, 2 weeks ago when you said that and it's no good, nobody cares at that point. It's the bomb's already gone off.
Yeah. We see it all the time with like, I remember with the Unabomber, I'd wonder later, like, whatever happened to that guy? You know, you would hear the story, like they found him.
Yeah.
And then the trial would be, unless the trial becomes an event in itself, which sometimes happens in the media. But it just disappears afterwards. Like, is he locked away? Did they kill him? What did they do? You know, and I see that with a lot of tragic news events. They love when it's the big blood event. And then the aftermath that you may be curious about, they never tell you about that part.
Right. Yes. You
know, we just want the immediate thing, like you're saying.
Yeah, we got a lot of work to do.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there is the I sometimes I don't know. Fantasize is probably not the right word. About overhearing the conversations that McLuhan and Gould would have had back into the 70s and 80s. Well, not long in the 80s. About the future of media and how Gould had a way more optimistic and positive outlook about what was possible.
Yeah.
You know, once everybody could speak, right? And we all had voices and whatnot. He had like almost utopian ideals about what could happen with the modern world. Now, of course, this is a guy who liked to stay at home, have phone conversations, preferred recordings to live shows, like
controlled bubble element to it or something. Eh? Like,
yeah, that was his life. There's no doubt about that, right? That's the kind of guy that he seemed to be, which is an interesting way because he used to say he hated applause. Right? He hated applause. He hated music competitions. He was perfectly fine. He didn't care about virtuosity at all. He said if somebody wanted to record a piano sonata one note at a time, programmed into the recording device, he doesn't care. He only cares if the final product is really good, and he wants a 0-to-1 relationship with the artist.
Wow.
So the listener is the 1, and the artist is the 0. The artist is not there. They should be you just get the sounds coming out of the speaker and everything else doesn't matter.
Would he be like today? Would he have just gone into being a DJ and, got able to
God.
live
DJ GG, yeah, I guess he could have been. But
not like I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying like
no. I know what you mean. Whatever he did, he would have been obsessive about it. I think because he got addicted really, really young, and then never changed his focus at any point in time. Everything, like even his conversations with Gould, you could say sure they're about media and whatnot, but it's just an extension of his interest in music because recording became combined with the music, right? So all of a sudden communications. Like, did you ever hear the idea of North, where he recorded all his conversations?
Oh, I don't think so, no.
He's got
conversations themselves.
No. He has two, I think they're two, I don't know what you want to call them, albums, pieces of music. You can get a box set of it. And he recorded conversations. So idea of North is like, it'll be listening to one guy living alone in Wawa or Hearst or, New Liskeard or someplace like that. And he'll record the guy talking about his life. And then eventually another voice will come in of someone from another small town in a rural community, and then they're talking about their life, and then another voice, sort of like you would layer the instruments in a symphony, but it's all these monologues about rural, lonely life.
It sounds like something that would totally like get into his head. I could see that, but at the same time, it sounds so much more like it's in the experiment zone rather than ever go public with it zone.
Oh, it's like the aesthetic appeal is minimal. It's really hard to put that puppy on and drive to work and be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna rock out to Idea of North, man. Put that on and just some guy. Yeah, so I was out hunting moose one day, and another guy. It was really raining bad, and like trying to enjoy that. It's pretty surreal.
Everyone in the carpool is talking. Guys like, this is a great part. You gotta listen to this.
Yeah, it's just not gonna happen, right? Doesn't make any sense. But it was an interesting idea, and it just shows his interests, right?
Yeah,
He's interested about the way that story is being projected through media.
Wow. Oh my God.
But it's still related to music in some way, because in his mind, he's able to imagine this as like, this is violin number 1, and this is the whatever section, and he can sort of picture it in those terms, even though it's different voices.
Yeah. I can see how McLuhan would totally totally jive with that, but at the same time, well, he was more of a cynic about all that stuff, right? Like he was.
Oh yeah.
He was so scared, and he was thinking, we got to educate. And so.
Definitely, and he tries to leave that out of his writing, but it's there all over the place. Right? It's not hard to spot. It's like when people try to tell me, Jerry Seinfeld, you don't know anything about his personality when you hear his comedy, right? It's just him up there telling jokes. And I think, are you kidding? This is a guy who's furious at the entire world. Like, he's not happy with the way things are. He's complaining nonstop. He's a bitter, anal person who has very particular tastes, and anyone who steps outside of it drives him crazy. There's a lot loaded into what seem like just jokes about incidental details of our lives, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's so obsessed with it that he's actually really, really frustrated with the smallest of things.
Oh yeah, exactly. And it's like that with McLuhan, even though, he sort of tries to act like he's just telling you his, his prognostication about how things are going to go or whatever.
Yeah.
But you can see he's not pleased about it. You know, when you read it, you know he's Catholic or Christian. You know, you can see that he's got issues with, and it's more obvious. Neil Postman makes it more clear, I think, that he's not happy with where things are going. He just lays it all out. Gould kind of tries to hide, or McLuhan kind of tries to hide it, which I do appreciate, though. I've said that before, like one of the problems with journalism today is not that they're being so subjective, because of course they're going to be subjective. Everyone knows you can't be objective, but it's that they don't try so hard anymore to be really objective.
Yeah.
And I know it's impossible, but I love it as a goal. Like, shoot for that star and miss it. That's fine.
Or at least come out clean about it and say, look, I know that I'm coming from this, and I have these assumptions, and I'm, you know, as sad as it is, some of these, like, you know, real hardline media outlets now, they've never maybe necessarily been fully admitting to it, but it's just the baseline assumption is, yeah, we're coming at it from this point of view. Mm-hmm. And so they've gathered the audience that's going to rally around that particular point of view.
Yeah, that's definitely happening now, but I don't know, like, in a way, I know people want to say, at least as far as our generation is concerned, and over here in the West, North America, it seems like Fox is the one that came about to sort of sell a brand of news, you know? Now, I do think that I had said before, like before the internet got out of control and things got the way they were now, I used to say, I don't mind Fox's in-your-face bias as opposed to CNN's pretending not to have one. You know? Because at least I know, right? At least I know. With the other guys, I'm not so sure. Like, I suspect they have this agenda that I know roughly what it is, but they're not really being clear about it. But then everybody was clear about it, and I was like, oh yeah, no, it's probably better the other way. Actually, I was totally wrong. But because now
we're in trouble all over the place here, actually.
You know, because everybody just lays it on the line now as if that's the new model. They're like, oh, Fox is making more money. We should all do that too. And I was like, Jesus Christ, that's not what I was saying, though. I was just, you know, I liked that they were open about the bias, but I still wish they tried harder, you know?
Yeah. Or at least it gave it in the sense of maybe two voices. Even the panel work. Like, have you ever seen those shows, like, where there's like a panel idea going on, and you think, oh, maybe this is going to be okay because it has, you know, this party or this political party, and then it has someone from this political party and someone from this political party. You think you're getting a rounded kind of spectrum, but then you realize it's still a caged conversation. It's still very much like, you know, it's the frame that's taking advantage of you as much as, you know, each of these people saying truth or anything. That's scary. How, like, even when they try to make it so that it looks like a proper forum or an arena, it's still caged. It's still, like, you know, in a little media box to some extent.
Oh yeah, well, there's no way to escape that entirely. They have rules about decorum and things you can and cannot say, and there's all sorts of things in place, right? Yeah. Do you hear a dog barking?
I do.
Okay, it's in my yard. And you know what? I've never had a dog bark in my neighborhood before. It is the first time ever. I can't believe it. I'm going to go close the window. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Now, I remember one of those closed boxes you were talking about. They had a show called Crossfire, I think it was called. I don't know if you remember this show. And it was an American news show that had like a Republican and a Democrat. But they were more media figures and not politicians. And one of them was Tucker Carlson. And the first time I became aware of Tucker Carlson was Jon Stewart went on this show, which was a CNN show, I think. Maybe NBC, who knows? It was some traditional media place. And he just tore a strip out of them and the show and the company and was really, really rude. You know, I mean, at the time it was charming and funny. And looking back on it, you could see Tucker Carlson just seething. Like, he's not happy about this in the least. I thought that would be the last we would ever see of that dude ever again, right? Somehow he's managed to become a huge force, like a Bill O'Reilly media tycoon almost. You know, he's a monster now. Yeah. I don't mean necessarily he's a bad guy. I don't know him. I don't want to say anything bad about some dude I don't know.
Well, monster in the sense that you can't not pay attention.
Yeah, just a big figure. You know, yeah, it's hard to ignore monsters. I've not seen a lot of real ones, but I imagine they would be hard to ignore if they were real.
Whether if they're on your side or on somebody else's side, like, I mean.
Well, as soon as you give it that name, if it's on your side, you might call it something else.
It reminds me a little bit of, like, you know, there's the old berserker kind of idea in, like say the Viking berserker, or the, like, in the trenches in war, the berserker that.
Oh yeah. There's a whole D&D character class based around it. Yeah.
And in some ways, you kind of want that guy on your team, but at the same time, you don't want to be stationed next to him or anything. You don't want to be like.
Yes, exactly right. You see it in hockey all the time. There'd be like some chintzy guy who does all these little dirty moves on the side of the plays, and the other team hates his guts. And then you say to the guy who hates him, you're like, yeah, but if he was on your team, you'd like him. You're like, oh yeah, for sure, he'd be my favorite player.
Perfect.
It's part of the game. Like, I remember joking about boxing. It was like, okay, we don't want to have a duel where, I don't know if this is the real true origins either, by the way. We don't really want to have a duel where we shoot each other, because that's not civilized. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to put a ring, and we're going to punch each other until one of us can't be punched anymore. Like, that sounds a lot better, but no punching in the balls, though. That'd be wrong. Okay, how about just only above the waist? Okay, that's a little more civil. I'll only punch you in the face or the belly. But not the. It out,
but there's civil rules. It's a game. We're gonna create.
Yeah. Not the back of the head, though. Okay, fine. Not the back of the head. Oh, by the way, you better put a ref in there, because I'm totally gonna break all of these rules. You know.
So just like maybe, is it a month ago? Not even a month ago. There was a special on TV about Mike Tyson. I'm not sure if you caught any of that, but it was like sort of a retrospect, looking back over like all the media that he got, all of his fights. And it was kind of that element where like this guy was a monster in the ring. But at the same time, you can see his progression or individuation kind of over time, where this person was taking advantage of him, this person was kind of sculpting him, and then something happened, and he lost somebody. He had these terrible losses of, like, you know, important people in his life dying at the wrong time, it seemed like, over and over again. And so what does he do? He takes it out in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just a force, right, in the 90s and 80s, 90s a little bit. And nowadays, he's almost a reinvented figure. He's older, he's got this mature side, but he knows he still gets in the ring.
Yeah. But he's more spiritual about it now. He's a profound and poetic man.
Yeah. He's hit his I'm Mike Tyson moment or something.
Oh yeah. He's beyond the figure we knew as kids in the mid '80s when he was dominating the sport. He's beyond that figure now into some kind of, you know, almost like a mystical figure.
Yeah,
you know, it's a pretty amazing transformation, and not one I expected, for sure. Because there's lots of boxers that are classy in the ring and don't scream things like "I'm gonna, you know, eat your children" or stuff like he used to scream. Who don't grow up to become profound, wise, interesting people. Like, there's the contrast between the two is so extreme, you wouldn't expect it from him. But then maybe because whatever he does to that extreme level. So when he got out of the ring and had to start looking inside, he did that really extreme too. I don't know, but he's a fascinating guy.
Yeah.
He's one of those ones that says he would be dead if it wasn't for boxing. And that's one of the reasons they have that famous line in boxing, which is because, you know, 5 or 6 people die every year from the sport. Not to mention how many get permanently brain damaged and whatnot. But they have this line in the sport that a lot of boxers use, which is that it saves more lives than it takes, because you have to think about where these people come from that go into a boxing gym and don't go back to the street again.
Right. Yeah.
As sad as that is.
They've learned to fight, and as a result, they're not dying at 18 or 17 because someone stuck a knife in them or something like that, or they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're at least trying to make a walled garden of the ring.
Yeah. But it's something, right? It's something.
It's something.
As unhealthy as it can be.
This may be too much of a stretch, but I'm going to try it a bit, because this actually brought up in my head that last goddamn garage thing, I think, with Midnight in the Mountains, maybe.
Oh yeah.
And you came across a guy that was a Sikh, and he was diagnosed with MS.
Yes.
And that crazy story, that striking story of like holding a baby in one hand, but then having your weapon out too and slashing your enemy's throat. kind of thing in the other.
Yeah.
Is that where Mike Tyson is?
Because at one point in the conversation, he turns to me and he says, the most perfect Sikh is someone who can hold up a beautiful baby in one hand and slice off the head of his enemy with the other one. And I was a little rattled. You got to remember, I'm hitchhiking. I don't know these people. I'm in a car with 3 strangers.
Definitely, yeah. He's got that warrior mentality, right? And I don't begrudge any religion for including a warrior aspect. Not in the least, because I know this kind of thing comes up a lot, especially in the discussion group that we're in. People have issues with Islam to some degree. And Mike Tyson is a Muslim. And he believes in the warrior side of things. Sometimes this is going to seem trite, but how you take a look at the progress of religion and you talk about the early days with animism and you start moving into like pantheism and then a full polytheism where all kinds of different things are represented. And eventually you go into a monotheism. We're like, no. All of that is just one God. And then some people are like, okay, that makes sense. And then a little bit later, Jesus is like, well, what about that God as a God of love?
Who is that?
And then not long after, maybe Muhammad's like, what if he's a God of war? And it's like, we want to break it back down to its constituent elements again. We just can't handle having it all mixed up into one thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's not entirely true because there's not really love and war for those two religions exclusively, but they get that rep sometimes. And I wonder if in our psyche, we have to put things in those boxes for some reason.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, a friend of ours, Tom, we'll either cut that out or we'll give him credit later. He got me thinking a little bit about Jung and Answer to Job, and it made me come back to this idea of a conjunction of opposites idea. And so that was in my head when I heard that story about the Sikh, or about this idea of holding the baby and holding your weapon at the same time, because there seems to be this problem of opposites, and especially religion seems to be able to at least contend with that rather than just being one-sided, even
because it's not ruled by logic and reason. Yeah,
you can actually have A and not A in the same thing, and
exactly
you can't get around it. Like it's just that's how nature is going to present itself, and that's how your own nature is going to present itself. And so, all those things were swimming in my head a little bit about having to come to terms with the Mike Tyson, but also the Mike Tyson that's like a really good dad and decided to put all his heart and soul into his kids at some point, kind of thing too. It's a terrible thing to wrestle with.
Yeah, well, because it's probably inside of you to some degree, right? So you have to deal with that, and you can get some pretty horrible anger inside and hatred inside of yourself. I get it all the time. Not all the time, I shouldn't say, but I used to when I was younger. And now with kids, I can feel the anger boil up. Now it's an anger out of love or whatever, but it's still a force you have to deal with. Like sometimes you're holding up the baby and the sword in the same hand, because you have no choice.
The baby, right? And the blade is right close.
Yeah, it feels that way, and you're like, I got to be a better dad. I got to be a better. How do I not have this conversation with my kid? How do I do this, in better ways? And you could feel the anger boil up, and so you understand the way people behaved in the past to some degree. The spare the rod, spoil the child kind of expression. You understand that it doesn't have to be a physical rod. Obviously, but nonetheless, the idea still persists. There's uncomfortable things you have to do.
Yes.
To get through life. And not even just for yourself. Never mind just for for your kids, but with kids especially, because you notice whenever you have anger, you feel a lot more guilt for it. You're more hyper aware of it, especially immediately after it happened. And the moment you're like, how many times have I told you? And then a few moments later, you're like, God, I suck. I did not respond that way.
What the hell? Why couldn't I control myself right then and there?
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about that because not long into this, which I'll say again, I had a great time reading this. It was a fantastic read. It brings up a point that I know is something that I struggled with when I was younger. I'll lead in by talking about this briefly. Before I had kids, I was hoping I would have a daughter. And the reason I was hoping I would have a daughter is because I felt for most of my life that I don't know if this is the right word, but I felt that I'm sexist to a certain degree. What I mean by that is that when I was younger, I noticed people talking about feminism, like in high school, and I would notice I really only liked hanging out with the guys.
Okay.
And I think this is odd that I want to get together with a woman and have sex and all this because I don't really like talking to them that much. I prefer talking to the guys, right, for whatever reason. And then as life would carry on, I noticed that continued to happen. So I took feminist literature in like grade 11. I started getting interested in this stuff. So that's pretty young.
Like you deliberately tried to confront yourself a bit?
Yes, at 17 years old, I started reading feminist literature to try to deal with this. I've never, and just think, my son is 10 and I'm 48. So at 38, I was saying, I still have a problem with sexism. I hope I have a daughter because that might, which is pathetic in a way, because I could ask you about this. Am I trying to sacrifice this fictional daughter on the altar of my healing of my sexist issues? Like, what is it? What does this fictional daughter give a shit about my problems? Why should I be hoping for her to come along and save me when I could just fix my own self? And maybe that's why I ended up with two sons, who I'm very happy with, by the way. And I love that I get to, play board games and do all the stuff I always love to do.
And break them up in the middle of the night when they're like, plastic swords are ready.
There's that too, that I have to constantly deal with as well, which is a little rough. So maybe that's how I'm being forced to learn this lesson. It's like, oh, you think boys are so great, do you? Well, how about you get a couple little ones? Maybe you won't think so much about that anymore.
Nice. There, yes.
Maybe it was the opposite. I don't know. But anyways, I thought that, right? And I'd frequently thought about the notion of people referring to God in the feminine. And I know for some reason, it's as soon as you do it, anybody wants to act like it's some kind of a political statement to do something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
These days,
or it's feminist, or it's
something like when Gord Downey did it in New Orleans is Sinking. I looked up to the she said, "Baby, Gordy, baby, you look so good. I got to scream." Whatever. Remember that?
Yeah.
She said, I swear to God, she said. So like, I looked at the Lord above. I said, "Hey, man, thanks." So he does say "man," and then later on, she said. So he refers to her in the feminine. And it was kind of a big deal because Tragically Hip were like a really great bar band.
Yeah. But Gord Downey had that side to him where he could just go into a poetic, what do you call it, like a fugue state or something. And
yeah, exactly. It's like Al Purdy had joined a bar band. It was a strange combination of things, right? Because you had like this serious poet playing with a band that didn't play very pretentiously. They played pretty straight ahead blues rock.
Yeah.
So they were appealing to that small town rural hockey community, and yet he was throwing ideas like that down their throats. And people would sit up and notice. And I was like, well, why is it such like, how could you possibly limit God to a gender and think that naming the other one is offensive when you always do the masculine? So what's the problem with the feminine?
Yeah.
I had those thoughts before. So books like this, are needed. And that there's still things to confront. So before I say any more, I want you to is there any question in there or comment you might have? Like, I don't think I phrased a question.
Well, thank you first. I mean, that was cool. And actually, that does bring up something else that I wanted to because there was that comment even just in the little note in the messenger where, I had a great time with this book. Like listening to an old friend, it was very familiar. And I thought oh, can I quote you on that? Can I use that somewhere?
Yes, I have more to say on that issue. That's another one of my statements, questions, whatever that I have to say. But
I guess I did have a question with that as sort of a follow-up, which was, we can circle back to the whole, whatever that is. I didn't necessarily write it thinking feminism in my head. And in fact, actually, in some ways, there was a response that way because I kept running into this thing time and time again. And I think I sort of explained that a little bit in the book where Neumann, he's got this great mother figure and it's this, daughter, young mother, crone combo. It's all together. It's all just mother. And then I go to talk to some of my friends and they have that combo where, I've got an older friend that I, asked about the cover. Could you draw some? She's an artist. Could you draw something for that? And she immediately wanted to say, well, not just daughter, let's put the whole spectrum of all roles that women have on the cover. And I was like, no. That, I don't care about all that stuff. There's lots of literature out there about that. That fight's being done by people, and I'm not competent enough to do that. But we're missing something just in that idea of like a daughter, and the idea like it's not the individual, but it's what you're observing as an individual. And the more I was able to sort of round this out and read, I was thinking, I don't have to look at this from a sex lens or a gender lens or a male, female, masculine, feminine lens. But what about like the hero and companion? What about the individual and their own observations when they look at themselves or look at others, and that kind of element? And that's where it's sort of the focus on the word daughter came from more than anything. But again, that's what I was aiming at. And well, I ended up where I ended up.
Well, it doesn't have a feminist vibe to it.
Okay.
Right. But it is talking about a child that does have a gender or a sex. Let's just say sex. Gender's become a...
Yeah.
I'm trying to drop it from my vocabulary until I understand what it means again. I'm not smart enough to use that word anymore. So
that's a great way to put it, actually. I like that.
So, but this child does have a sex, and so it is easy to slide over into that category, but it doesn't, like, you're not quoting a lot of feminist thinkers. That's for sure. They might show up here and there, but it's not focused in that direction in any way. It's focused more around like a Joseph Campbell kind of approach, a more of a mythological approach.
Yeah.
And
in some ways, it's really, all of my own obsessions came out because it's my book, right? I'm writing the book that I wanted to read. So of course I'm going to dip into all the people that I'm sort of wrestling with or that I'm working with.
Well, we're similar ages and we're similar background, and your story is very familiar to me. That's why it's so much like listening to an old friend, because I recognize the tone, I recognize the world that you're coming from. And the way you're able to shine a light on it from a perspective that I don't have. Experience is a muffled lantern that only sheds its light on the bearer. So you're able to show me perspectives of that same world that I inhabited, just slightly altered, right? And with different stories that I'm not familiar with. Some of them I am. Like, there'd be sections here where, like, I know this story very well. And then there'd be other sections where I had no clue. I was going to ask you, did you wrestle with the few stories that do exist that show these other, like, what about Susanna, for example? Where she gets accused by the lecherous old men of either sleep with me or you're going to be, or we're going to tell this story about how you screwed this other guy and we caught you. And she says, I'd rather be a sinner in the eyes of men than in the eyes of God. And so the elders go and tell people. They say, she was with this young, hot guy. And one of them really emphasizes how hot the guy was. And you have to stone her now because clearly she shouldn't be doing this, right? They don't even ask where the guy is, of course. And then Daniel the prophet leaps from the soil and says, no, these men are dirty liars and she's innocent, and she gets saved. Did you wrestle with any of those types of stories?
That particular story, I certainly didn't wrestle with. And like so many other people out there, even with my background, with a pretty, decently devoted Christian family, I've got blind spots, like, for the entire Bible anyway. And so I was picking and choosing for what I'm familiar with.
And it's also apocryphal too, by the way.
Okay. There was a story.
So I'll be honest about that. Like, they removed it, and they probably removed it for a reason. But nonetheless, it's there, and we do read it. Like some people do read it. So
yeah, true.
It still came from the tradition, right? And it's still a part of it. People just read it in non-canonical books.
Yes, yeah. There was a story in. I'm not sure where it is, but is it maybe the sons and daughters of David? Maybe. And there's one. There's one son that, like, basically has a crush on his sister.
Right.
To the point that he ends up raping her. And I was very tempted to use that because, again, it's sort of I think it's, it's standard, it's old, it's in there. And the perspectives were so ranged in the sense that he does all these, terrible deeds and then tries to deny it, tries to run away. It's almost like an immature boy story.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this girl has this totally practical like response. I wish I could remember her name now.
And she's more of the hero in this story. I don't know this story, but
yeah. But anyway, she has this idea of like, well, you did it now, so basically just, let's get married, even though it's weird. Let's, because the act is done, and
the life in the ancient world is hard for my soft ass to imagine.
And actually, back to the Job thing. There's one line at the end of Job that caught my attention a lot, just as it's in my head now, at least now, because I've been looking at this stuff. But there's a line where, after all of that whole book, and Job is restored at the end, there's this deal where he has new sons, he has new daughters. The daughters are the most beautiful thing that you'll ever see in the world, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then of all things, there's this one line where it says, and Job treated his daughters to the same inheritance that his sons would get.
Huh.
And it's like, I've never seen it before, never thought about it before. And then I was like, what the hell is that doing in this book? Like, are they even back then making some kind of comment about an equality between sons and daughters, or the ideal father would have something else in his head, kind of thing?
Well, there's no way this conversation hasn't been going on, for as long as we can for as long as people have been living together in these groups, right? You take a look just go to my back alley here and hang out with the other neighbors, and the men kind of congregate in one area slowly. Like the couples all come together and then slowly move apart again. Yeah. And they come together as couples and go apart as sexes.
There's a long history, even
So there's no way the groups don't talk about each other, and there's no way they don't even conspire a little bit here and there. And there's things going on that level, and have been for a very long time. And I kind of reject the notion that feminism is some new idea. I'm sure that this is an ongoing conversation that's been happening for a long time, and the two sides fighting for power or respect or balance or something in order to just get along and move forward, because we have to somehow, right?
Yeah. Actually, in some ways, that's where I am now with the conclusion, because of this sort of looking at the book of Job again, and looking at Jung's answer to Job and some other things. So he had this idea of a conjunction of opposites, but he also brings up lightly this idea of a marriage of opposites. And the marriage of opposites thing is kind of in my head a bit now, where I'm thinking, is that maybe actually the better solution, where it's, in a sense, you have these two obviously different things, but you're bringing them into a union where you're kind of saying you're co-authorities, you're now a team, and abstractly you're now one. You're going to have to contend with each other and decide who's in charge of this or that. But the marriage, at least, is sort of like almost a conscious recognition, right? It's a conscious thing of saying, I'm identifying with you, you're identifying with me. There's something bigger between us than just, what I want out of you.
Well, there's obviously enough that we share, despite the seemingly opposite. Because it's a weird thing, right? Like, throughout this book, I got the feeling that you weren't just focused on the daughter archetype or the notion of the daughter in story, or, all the things it's ostensibly about, but that in a part of you was trying to come to terms with who you are and how you've moved through life, and your struggle to try to deal with finding meaning in story or religion or myth or whatever you want to call it. And how do you deal with the metaphysical aspect of that? Like, I know you make it clear that you don't necessarily have to believe those things, but you also don't make it clear that there's no power in that, and that you want to entirely let it go, because there's a part of you that seems to sort of like the magic of it or the mystery of it to some degree. You can't abandon it entirely. Am I wrong?
Oh no, that's exactly right. Actually, one of my other reviewers made some comment about how it seemed like a great book for a crisis of faith and then a restoration or reconstruction of faith. And I've definitely had to deal with that in terms of just processing all this stuff. And in some respects, though, it's always going to come down to the mystery of it, because you're not going to solve these things in a human shell and a human perspective kind of element. But there's this weird participation in story, I think, that is what captured my mind for that particular thing. And it's the role of fiction in faith. It's the role of like participating in something that's maybe abstractly true, but it's not necessarily the case that it's, historically, materially true. If you know where I'm going with that.
Oh, yeah. And like you mentioned about Northrop Frye, you can't really, when he talks about that, you can't really separate the Bible as history or not history.
Yeah.
It's not that simple.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly not that. And as soon as you start talking, as soon as you start making statements, there's that element of like, you're telling stories. You're not actually recounting the factual, evidential, what really happened in a physical material place. And so it's almost part of that barrier of, the barrier of consciousness, maybe, of some kind, where we're stuck here, but we can participate in a weird way too.
Right. Well, in some ways, the better the story, the higher the chance you're going to get something out of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you're telling a story to somebody about something that happened to you in your life, what's more important? Giving an objective journalistic account of the details to that person so that they can hear exactly what happened to you as if they give a shit, or trying to find, I'm obviously selling one side more than the other by how or trying to find a way to give them as impactful a story as possible so they can take something away from it at the end. And it's obvious where I'm sitting on that, but it's one of those things where we often will complain that the fish is getting bigger in the story. But if the story entertains you more at the end, or like you get a bigger fictional meal of these fish, then maybe so be it. It's not such a big deal. It's only a big deal when you're actually trying to recount events in a straightforward journalistic fashion. It's only then that the storytelling can become a problem.
And maybe in the sense of control or possession element of it. Like if you possess the story, if it's yours, if it's a piece of property, that's a different attitude towards like that whole element compared to something like, say, I'm involved in the story. I have a role in the story.
Yes.
There are two different ways of kind of going about that, I guess. In some ways, though, I think that's probably why it wasn't really my intent at the beginning to bring in so much sci-fi for the book. But at the same time, it's where I was, right?
I saw your graph. You have nerd in your blood. You can't help yourself.
Exactly. But at the same time, it's like you're saying with story, where like with sci-fi, like it didn't happen. Like it's purely imaginative. It's purely fictional. And yet at the same time, there's this weird involvement in it. There's this weird, this is such an involving, great story that it's going to affect how I behave in the future, let's say. It may, the fact that people are building lightsabers and they really do want to make a lightsaber that's going to cut through things.
Yeah. Or that it became a recognized religion in England.
Yeah.
Now, joke or not, a joke like that is not totally a joke.
Yeah. How many things start with it? Like, how many things have a great start that's just like, hey, that's funny. Want to try that? And then next thing people adopt it and adopt it and adopt it.
Well, and if you pretend long enough, you'll start to believe it.
Yeah. And so that was, again, that became, I guess, maybe the what I was wrestling with in terms of, it doesn't have to be that historical material accurate thing. It has to be, what does it do to you? What does it compel you into? Does it make you a better person? Does it make you aim at things better?
Right. And so the issue with, if a daughter, and especially a virgin daughter, becomes, despite the story of Isaac and Abraham, if that becomes the most famous symbol of sacrifice, and I'd say to some degrees it does, when South Park has their little episode in the rainforest, and someone has to get sacrificed to the evil monster in the jungle, it's a woman, it's a cheerleader they put up there, and she's, oh God, come help me. becomes the sacrifice. And you read story after story after story where that's the case. Even if you're thinking, well, they're sacrificing this virgin daughter, clearly because they've chosen that, that's the greatest thing they have, which is why the sacrifice is so powerful.
Yeah.
But that's a crappy defense if you're a daughter.
Yeah, it's like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, like story-wise, I get it, but if you're a daughter reading that, or you're someone else reading that, even who has a daughter, or is going to date someone's daughter, whatever, you're going to be involved with a daughter at some point in time in your life, and now you're going to have that imprinted on you to some degree. This is the greatest sacrifice. And the greatest part is easy to miss when that word sacrifice comes so soon afterwards, right?
For sure. So, Northrop Frye has an idea around this. I think I kind of tried to grab a little bit of that from him, but like in the Bible in particular, since it's sort of one of those, it's one of those monster literature packages of history. Yeah. He's got this idea of like a type and then an antitype, and the Abraham story is obviously sort of fitting into that element of a type. Like it's a type of story, and it's a greatest sacrifice story. But the Bible always kind of has this weird reflection back of like, saying, okay, that happened as a story, let's say. Now let's look at it from a different angle, 200 years later or whatever. And so you get this weird kind of, these reflections. And that's where this Jephthah character in the story with his daughter comes too. You have an Abraham character where this guy's, he's fairly independent, he's a leader of kinds, but he gets it in his head that he's got to sacrifice his kid. And of all things, instead of being stopped at that moment, he goes through with it. And so it's this antitype to Abraham, right? Like
Right.
And again, that was sort of one of these flashes for me for the book, whereas like, I better start there because at least that's far enough back that it's, it's putting things into perspective. And there's a difference between the Abraham Isaac story and the Jephthah and his daughter story. And that daughter word is there. And the daughter doesn't even have a name in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what are we missing if, 3 billion, 4 billion people in the world think the Abraham story is that important? But we don't seem to think this other one is that important.
Where they follow through.
Where they follow through.
Right. Yeah. So you figure that should be more, I mean, I'm just guessing, but
maybe there's a lesson there.
You would think, right? Yeah, you would think. And no, that doesn't have to be a feminist thing. And sometimes the danger, like I remember even as a teenager, I used to, once in a while you come up with these little phrases and you think you're so clever. But I used to think like, well, obviously I have an issue with feminism because look at the word. It's focused on women. It's not focused on equality. It's focused on women's rights. Otherwise it would be called something other than feminism.
It's supremacy. It's female supremacism.
Yeah. Well, and you think, oh, that's it. I got them in a rhetorical trap. The whole industry's dead now, right? Because you're only fucking 20 years old and you don't know what you're talking about. You don't really know anything. And not that I know much better now, but I like that line from Bill Burr. The older I get, the more full of shit I realize I am. It's like every time I learn a new thing, it opens up a whole new field I'm ignorant about. Yeah. And so I could learn little bits and pieces of information on the outskirts of my knowledge base. And each one of them opens up these giant pies of things that I don't know anything about at all. And so I'm constantly getting more and more aware of my own ignorance. And even though I'm getting smarter, hopefully, at the same time, and maybe smarter is the wrong word, but nonetheless, you know what I mean? I'm moving that direction. At the same time, I'm more hesitant to be sure on anything I say because I'm more aware of how many things I don't know now.
Right.
And it's this unfortunate catch-22 you get caught into because you're like, if I were to talk to myself from a long time ago, I wouldn't be very forceful about, hey, you're wrong on this, you're wrong on that, because I'm not totally sure anymore. That guy was really sure, but he didn't know that much.
Oh, you just made me think here now. So Abraham was pretty old when he had his kid, when he had Isaac. What would have happened if Abraham was maybe 20? Maybe that's part of it too.
Oh, yeah. The wisdom. Well, because there's a story for sure about Abraham in there. The power to make that choice to not sacrifice is clearly a big deal for those people at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what kind of wisdom went behind that decision?
Yeah.
To stop that practice.
Yeah. And is that maybe the greatest gift of aging? And the more you can age and the more you can get that wisdom, you have the chance, or you have the ability to say, oh, I have a choice. Even though I've got the knife out.
Yeah.
Or
I haven't done it yet.
I haven't done it yet, so I still have choice, right? I have a choice in this.
Yeah, there's some wisdom in there for sure, and that's assuming we believe that we have choice. But yeah, that's definitely there. No, it's great that you had. You didn't have him there, obviously, but it's great that you had those figures with us throughout the book, because it helped me constantly reframe all these different stories that I would get throughout the book, right? Because you jump around a lot of different stories. Well, this person did this, this person did that, and this person did this. But if I constantly have those guys with me, and I'm thinking, okay, well, how does this relate back to this central theme, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I say sometimes it's also this other thing about you trying to figure out your religious views, or your spiritual views, or your maps of reality, or however the hell you're seeing the world. Yeah. You're also doing some of that too.
For my own part, though, I needed some anchors. Like, I needed that, like, sort of sense of, like,
how do you navigate this material otherwise?
Yeah. And
right. So let's say that there is an issue with how daughters are seen across story, and then take a look at figures like Greta Thunberg, for example. Now, there's a daughter who has achieved far beyond her means, as far as, like, I have nothing against her. Okay, she's just a girl. I don't know a lot about her, but she's a daughter, and she's a kid, and she became hugely famous. Yeah, and if you have a society where there is a lack of daughters in story fulfilling a particular kind of role, maybe they would be too anxious to grab. You see where I'm going now? Too anxious to grab any figure they can out of the pop culture around them to prop up in that position, because they don't have a lot of guides to go off of, because there wasn't those guides in the stories they grew up with.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Right. And is it possible those figures come about partly because of this?
There's well, I wasn't sure if I was going to bring them up or not, but there was a Peterson interview at some point where he was talking about how, in a sense, there was sort of that, like, until let's say the pill, the feminine story was kind of like, for 5,000 years, 10,000 years, the feminine story had to deal with being a mother, had to deal with childbirth and all those things. And then suddenly now there is this chance we can write a new story, but have we done that yet? To some extent, like, there's that question.
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem like in some ways you can almost see it in the media with these characters, like, where we're wrestling with, is the female hero just a male hero, but with different parts, sort of thing, which obviously isn't going to be satisfying to anybody.
That's what the 80s tried.
Yeah.
To some degree.
Yeah, and even to some extent, like the Wonder Woman type of character. It's almost like where there's, like, she's got a skimpier outfit, maybe. Or
there's a bit of roots in fetishism there too.
Yeah, yeah. But at the same time, it's a weird kind of draw, in the sense that, it's the Camille Paglia thing, where the boy's eyes look up to this figure and they're in awe. They're because mm-hmm. it's an archetypal female kind of figure and all that stuff. So, I mean, we're obviously dealing with that in some ways. But at the same time, yeah, like with Greta, there's this sense that she's winning the attention game, or in her little couple of years there, she did that. She was using words. She wasn't really like, she didn't grab a sword and start hacking at people. She didn't hold a baby.
Right. Well, that's not that's not a common hero story right now. Literally in our culture.
But at the same time, like, everyone has to wrestle with the idea of it. Is she worth my time, or is she somebody else's problem? Is she going to change the world, or do we have to stop her from changing the world, sort of thing? In a larger context, this is maybe a bit of that problem between like the innovator and the activist, to some extent, where the innovator is sort of like oh, I'm looking at the world, but I bet you we could make it better if we just invent a thing and it serves a purpose and solves a problem, and there we've leveled up, say, because of a gadget or because of device, media. The media works us over completely and we're in a better world. We're in a paradise kind of thing. Or the activist, which is, this is terrible to say, but there's a Simpsons episode where Marge Simpson gets complaining about something, and as a result, I think a cartoonist pokes fun at her and turns her into a squirrel, and she runs around saying, "Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that." And so it becomes almost a nag archetype kind of thing. And like, are you inventing something to solve a problem, or are you trying to get enough attention to change people's minds? I hope that's not the two narratives that we're working with, but they seem to be playing out in the business world and in the media world right now, in the political world even, for that matter. And I hope there's an alternative maybe to that. I don't know.
Yeah, I can say right off the bat, I guess I fell into the category of decided she's not worth paying attention to when you gave that list, because I don't really know much about what she said. I probably agree mostly with the things that she says, because I do kind of have a bit of that bent to me, but probably not strongly. At least not as strongly as it sounds like she does. But I am fascinated with her as a character, right? Because just the idea of this figure, this young student, who isn't really an expert in the field, suddenly becoming like one of the biggest public communicators on that issue, which is a bizarre thing.
It is, yeah.
You would think that it would be one of those experts who happens to be good at communication to the public and dumbing things down for the rest of us. It usually is. Like when Carl Sagan became famous for talking about the cosmos. Yeah. He had a way of explaining things that the regular person could understand, and yet he still had the credentials to be worth our time in that field.
Yeah. Actually, this brings up something else that I in the process of the book and the process of looking at some of the other writers, I came across this idea a bit from Marshall McLuhan and Bernard Lonergan, where there's this idea of like an authority. Marshall McLuhan had this conversion thing over to Catholicism. And one of his things that he had he had this idea of like, if you demand answers, if you come to it with honest questions, then an authority will welcome those questions and will satisfy those questions. And so in his own world, that kind of seemed to work out okay for the Catholic Church. But that idea that an authority, an authority isn't a wall of noise. An authority isn't like a barrage or like someone that pounds the truth into you. But instead, an authority is someone that welcomes all honest questions and satisfies all honest questions. That rang as like this little thing of like, like you look at a Carl Sagan, and it seems like he's got that attitude where he's not trying to like berate anybody. He's just trying to bring understanding. And he's got that authoritative kind of element to him. But then anytime any character, like, I don't want to use Greta in particular, but I mean, anybody that seems to be like too emotional and too neurotic or too forceful or too finger pointy, it suddenly doesn't have that real sense of like a welcoming and satisfying vibe to it. And so again, that's where media is coming to. And we could probably even tie this back to your story with Tucker Carlson and Jon Stewart maybe to some extent, where the emotional person is they draw attention, right? They draw, like, just you zone in on like, oh, something's important just because of the emotion. But are they actually welcoming and satisfying and resolving, maybe, for that matter? It's really tough. And so I don't know if like, let's say a daughter archetype has been found that can do that in our stories yet. In my wilder times, I mean, this is maybe again going to George Lucas and Star Wars and stuff. Lucas has a weird infatuation with young girls and his characters, right? Like, there's the Princess Leia, there's the new Rey. Is it Han Solo? There's like a young girl at the end, and the young girl at the end is like the leader of a cell of rebels kind of thing. There's a lot of the even Padme. When we first see Padme in the first movie, the Phantom Menace movie, she's like a queen. She's an elected queen.
Yeah, and she's clever too, because she gets a servant to play the role while she pretends to be a servant in case something goes wrong. She's not just a queen, but she's competent.
Yeah, so there's something really neat about that, about how like she is young. All these supposed older characters have to work with her as the authority kind of thing. You see these advisors around her, but she's also got this competent side, and so it's a unique character, right? Like it's not something that we're totally used to, but maybe it's a new story that we're telling at this point.
It might be, yeah. I'm not sure, but it was a thing I definitely thought about when I was reading through your book, and it occurred to me that there was these figures, because people have been talking about Greta an awful lot. And a number of other girls like her. David Suzuki's daughter is kind of famous now as well.
Yeah.
There's been a few of these figures, and I was wondering why it was. Like, we're not really seeing teenage boys become famous in the same way, and I don't know if they just lack the social skills. I mean, teenage boys aren't that great. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not a huge fan of teenage girls, like teenagers in general.
Well, maybe that's it too, though, right? Like, I mean, even in adults, the competent leader is a rare thing. someone that really captures everybody's heart, and like you trust them. That alone is a miracle. If you find a 60-year-old that you trust, it's kind of a surprising thing to follow.
Well, and I've got this weird, like, to go back about a minute here or so ago, I got this weird association with people being really sure of themselves and finger pointy, as you were saying, like because Greta comes across as so sure of herself. And I want to emphasize it's nothing against her.
Not that we know her content, right?
Yeah, because I don't know her well enough, but I just know the "how dare you" and the yelling and stuff, little clips that I'd see, and that kind of thing. But if they come across that way, I'm almost more like, the more sure of someone of themselves a person is, almost the less sure of them I am after that. If I see them being really, really sure of themselves, I'm almost like, I've never been that sure of myself except when I was wrong. I don't know if I want to trust this person.
Yeah.
I need a bit of that humility in there for me to be able to buy it, right? Yeah. It might be an opposite response for others, because as you're saying, people respond to that emotion that, as much as I might, like, I'm a little bit skeptical or cynical, even though I can see a box of tarot cards from here. So clearly I got my flaky side too.
Skeptic tarot.
Yeah, well, I play around, but ultimately I don't believe it. I'm generally really skeptical, and I want to believe things. It's not always easy.
Yes, true. Yeah. There is something to that, though, in the sense of, as many visionary leaders as there are out there that lead us to a promised land, to a better sort of place, there are just as many that drive us off the cliff. And so there's sort of that scare in some respects of, like, if you're so sure, then, well, if you're so sure, then you're probably not the one that's going to stop the blade at your child's throat.
No, you're not. You're not. No. But you're also not going to be the one who finishes an arc.
True, yeah.
Right? You do need those people around at some point in time. The people who can continue. Was it that General Patton had that great line about a bad plan now is better than a perfect plan next week.
Yeah, because you could have lost the war by then.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you just don't really have the other choices, right? So you do need those people with that hardcore conviction for when things really do get serious. But the thing is if they're wrong, once you're on that boat, you're screwed, right?
That's true, yeah.
So you need a series of checks and balances in the way to make sure that before you listen to a person who's that sure of themselves, they better bloody well know what they're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe that's one of the values of this sort of, Judeo-Christian Islamic line, where there's this idea of the prophet, and, some people listen to the prophet and change their ways. Some people don't listen to the prophet. Is it a false prophet? Is it a true prophet? There is something weird that we're sorting out that way, right? And then at the same time, well, can a daughter be a prophet? If we're going to be like sort of, strict about that. Can a daughter change a father's mind?
Or do we have any daughter prophet figures in like a major religion, you know? I'm having a hard time thinking of anything. I mean, I can come up with goddesses, of course, but I'm thinking specifically of like the leader of a religion. Even cults, they're often, I mean, hell, that NXIVM thing in the States was all women except the leader.
What's up with that?
Right? Like, why is it always dudes? I'm not really sure I understand. Yes, I assume you could have a female prophet. I assume, to answer that question, but I'm having a hard time coming up with one.
Yeah. The only thing, again, this is maybe a little bit just because of the frame that I was using for my book, but the father-daughter relationship of like the Zeus-Athena thing. Again, I kind of clutched onto that because I was thinking, well, at least that's ancient. At least that's like, you know, a very old story.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a weird element there where like Athena stands up to her father. Yep. But there never seems to be an element of like, well, I should be in charge of Olympus from Athena. I mean, maybe working it out, you could find something. I don't know. I'm not a perfect student of the ancient Greek mythology or anything like that. But at least it's a model for a father-daughter, like intimate but platonic, and also sort of listening to each other type of relationship.
Right. Yeah, no, that is positive. And I don't feel they've been entirely shortchanged. Those examples do exist, and there's lots of, and if you expand beyond religion and go into fairy tales and whatnot, you start to see a few daughter stories here and there.
Yeah.
It's not as common as it could be, and that's changed a lot in our modern culture. I mean, there's no hard time finding books about daughters, stories about daughters filling all kinds of roles. As daughters first and foremost, though, throughout cartoons and novels, and like the world's filled with it now, right?
Yeah.
And the schools even have like policies in place to ensure that the books are somewhat balanced between who the different heroes are. And I remember early on, like being really happy to show my son Wizard of Oz when he was young.
Okay.
You know, my favorite fantasy film of all time, but it stars a daughter who doesn't really have a father and mother.
Not really, no.
You know,
it is in some ways a growing up story, right? And
yeah,
it's true that the character maybe is, like, say, a daughter or is female, but that's not the issue, right? It's a child. It's a child that's kind of growing up through the imaginative process. And all the lessons that she learns is like, you kind of want your kid to be able to, make friends, build teams, take up journeys.
Oh, yeah. Well, she does it all in a very feminine way, though. I mean,
there's maybe more of it's certainly not like vanquishing foes with a sword or anything like that.
No, not really. I mean, she throws a bucket of water on someone. It's about as violent as she gets, really. I mean,
yeah. Yeah.
Pretty brutal consequences, mind you, for that bucket of water, but still.
Oh, I didn't mean for that to happen. Oh.
Yeah, and it's an accident too, right? She's only trying to put out the fire. She's not even trying to hurt the person.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, I don't know. That's a pretty soft approach for a hero. You're not going to see a lot of success, generally speaking, with that approach on the road to being a hero. Anyways.
I could pitch another story at you. And again, maybe this is sort of part of just, processing all this stuff. But I got this other story. It's like a children's book called The Dream Well. And the main character in that is a daughter. And I never really thought about it in terms of, is she a feminine character or a feminist character? I kind of just tried to write her as a kid as much as anything. But maybe I got to go back and look at that now, because maybe there is that difference. Like there's, maybe there is an approach that, again, could be useful for the boy growing up or the girl growing up, because there's skills that are valuable and, that can work.
Mm-hmm. Well, remember how you said you wrote something you wanted to read?
Yeah. Okay.
Right? I often make music for the same reason, but I think the world works in that way to some degree. So what I mean by that is that if there is if these stories are missing, or if maybe they exist but don't get promoted, or they end up becoming apocryphal, or something like that, maybe the world is constantly trying to fill that role anyways, and has been for a long time, and they're just harder to find those stories because people are trying to, just like you and me are doing that, writing the things we want to read. So is everybody else, and so is the larger organism of humans, you know what I mean? Not just as individuals, but collectively we tend to make the things that are missing.
Yeah, because there are stories like the Esther story, I think, is it in the Bible, where she's not really a prophet, but she's warning that, something bad could happen if we're not careful here. I got to go to the king and tell him, kind of thing. But maybe it comes back to that mature idea of are we mature enough as a species? Part of the angle again that I was trying to look at with this observer side of trying to find an archetype for the observed, or what we're projecting, and as a result of that, I got looking at the audience, and maybe these stories have always been out there, and the storytellers are trying to tell us these stories, but it's the audience that's maturing. It's the audience that's coming up and I think I'm ready for that story now. Let's hear more about that story.
Right.
And
that could very well be.
It's taken 5,000 years to level up or mature up.
Well, and I could be wrong, but I suspect it could take a decade to go right back.
Yeah.
If things go really, really drastically wrong, most of the ability to have this discussion is pretty privileged.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You take a look at the history of our species, and we're pretty lucky to be sitting here being able to have this conversation at all. Never mind across these crazy distances. It allows us to think about all kinds of issues that we may have been dealing with in immediate terms for a long time in ways that just weren't possible before.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So in the ancient times, whatever stories happened, but it wasn't really going to have as huge an impact. People weren't going to complain about hey, I'm not being represented in that story properly. They're too busy trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
Right, to care about that kind of thing. And then you constantly see that from countries that will make fun of the West for the petty little things we argue about. They're arguing about who can use what bathroom, whatever the hell, and I had to eat a dog to stay alive last week. So we can seem pretty petty in that way.
Yeah.
But it's quick and easy to go backwards, and that's a danger, I think. It's a danger to take a look around and say, well, there's flaws with how this is set up. Let's tear it all down, And even just to remove chunks and try to replace other pieces, it's very difficult to do that without toppling things.
Oh, come on. You're sounding like a conservative now or something. Man, get progressive.
Individually, I'm very much liberal, but on a social level, once you have kids and they're in school and you're like, my God, I hope everything holds together, man. I can't handle it falling apart now. I'm not out.
Torch down. Put the damn torch down.
I'm not out planting trees as a hippie anymore. Now I got a life. I got a bookshelf over here. I don't want it to fall over all of a sudden and crush me.
It's true. Yeah. I guess it goes back to the one thing you're talking about where, one of your goddamn garage things again. It's you had an opinion 10 years ago, 10 years pass, you come back to it and you realize, I don't agree with that guy.
Yeah, it's scary.
Timeline is just, hey, wait a minute. There's some continuity here of it's still me, but what's changed?
Yeah, well, you don't know the moment. Very rarely is there an epiphany moment. Things just kind of happen, and then you don't really realize they've happened, and then you confront your old opinion from before, and all of a sudden it's brutally obvious. Yeah, that's why I was fascinated with that memory study. Malcolm Gladwell talked about it in one of his podcasts, where they did flashpoint memory. So there was 9/11. Where were you on 9/11? What happened, right? And then you would go into this room and you would write down what happened to you on that day. And 5 years later, you do it again, 10 years later, and 15 years later.
Okay.
15 years later, 70% of the details had changed in the majority of the people's papers, right?
I can totally buy that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that didn't even surprise me when I heard that. This is the part that surprised me. When confronted with their original paper, they would come up with excuses for why that must have been wrong and why they were right now. They couldn't accept that that was what happened. You know, they just couldn't accept it. It reminded me of, I think it was Lacan who did that funny hypnotism experiment where he'd hypnotize somebody that the room had no furniture in it. It was totally empty. And then he would say, now go over there and get me that glass of water on the windowsill. And they would walk around the couch and around the table and everything, right? And he'd say, why did you go over there? And he'd say, oh, I saw an old friend of mine by the window. Like they would come up with these excuses for why they took this. They couldn't just say.
There's a couch in my way.
Yeah, they couldn't say it, right?
That's hilarious. That's so good. Yeah. I can say, yeah, I think I've heard of that experiment somewhere. But it's a weird kind of, you know, we're always justifying the present maybe then in some way. And we're so wrapped up in, you know, the now ego almost, that all that past stuff is just, all that is malleable right now. I'm justifying right now.
Yeah. It's sometimes it's terrifying to think about how independent your brain seems to be from, you know, I think you talk about it too, the difference between the brain and what is this other thing, the mind,
Yeah.
I don't really know what you call it, but you can have like a dialogue. Like there's certain times I think my brain is out to get me. I think it gives me bad advice, and I think, well, why are you doing that? Stop that. And it's like I'm having a conversation with it, but it's only one brain, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? But nonetheless, it's happening. I'm hearing it suggest things at me that I don't want it to suggest, and then I'm fighting back against it.
Yeah.
You know, there's that dialogue going on. And so that by the end of it, if I come up with some kind of conclusion, I'm like, well, how much of this is, can I even trust, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot more going on than just sort of, you know, one voice or whatever. You almost have to say, well, is this voice worth my time or worth paying attention to? Can I trust it?
Can I even turn it off if I don't?
Can I turn it off?
You know, because there's people that, I mean, you see the guy that cut off that kid's head on the bus, right? He claimed demons were telling him to do it. He's out now. He's on, they gave him a magic, no more talk to demons pill, and he's out on the streets, and it's all okay. And you know the story, right?
Oh, yeah. It was on a public bus, wasn't it?
It was on a public bus, yeah. I remember at the time, too, because I shouldn't be laughing about this, but at the time, there was a guy in Toronto who had like a pocket knife, and he was on a public transit. He got shot by the police. He just brandished like a pocket knife, and he's like 10 feet away, and he died. And there was like 5 cops around, and I was like, my God, a guy alone on a bus. Didn't even have the keys and the ignition at the time, right?
So and yet everybody was just hypersensitive at that point? Like,
I guess. And then like within a 2-3 month period, this other thing had happened where the guy had cut off a dude's head and then was walking forward brandishing the head, right? And the cops just arrested him without incident. And I was like, you know what? I think if they had shot that guy and not the other guy, people would complain less. Like they probably wouldn't have had, they were like, yeah, you shouldn't have shot him, but he was brandishing a freshly severed head. That would be a little creepy. Like, why are they shooting the wrong guys? And I don't know, I'm not saying that guy should have been shot. Obviously, he has serious mental problems, and I don't wish bad things on criminals, other than they get better and don't hurt people like that.
But still, we're processing all of this, right?
But yeah, this guy had things talking in his head, telling him to do things, and he was compelled to do it as far as medical professionals were concerned, and they're professional enough that our legal system trusts them to let this guy back out with these pills that apparently solve this problem. You know, and I'd read lots of stories like that. Like there was a guy in England who had a tumor in his brain, and then he became attracted to children, and he ended up going to jail for exposing himself to a child or something. And then he said, "Oh, I've got problems in my head. I got these headaches. They found the tumor. They removed the tumor." He said, "I don't have the issues anymore." And eventually they let him out, and he had no issues. And then he came back. He said, "Doctor, I'm getting urges to play with children again." Tumor had come back.
Whoa. That's a hell of a wake up call in terms of, okay, we're studying you from now on kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it also was like, there was a few moments that made me not hate criminals. That was one of them. Seeing Colonel Russell Williams with the bra and panties, taking a photograph of himself. You know those photographs? Horrible photos.
Where I live, we're half an hour away from that airbase.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is the place.
Right. Well, creepy photos. But when I saw the photos, the first thing that popped in my mind was, my God, that guy's really sick. And I don't mean sick like colloquially. I don't mean like twisted. you
Like,
know, or
cast him into the fire kind of stuff.
I mean sick as in like medically there's something wrong with him, actually wrong, you know. And it wasn't so much that I felt bad for him or something like that in the moment that these things started, as this started happening to me. It's that I just felt bad for people in general that have those types of things happen to them and they feel compelled, whether it's the guy who cut off that kid's head or Russell Williams. And of course, the tragedy is even worse when you consider these innocent people being brought into their story. Makes it even more horrible. But the fact is that it does lend credence to those Sam Harris types who talk about free will and whether or not we do have this choice. As you're saying, you know, you have that choice up until the last moment with that knife at the baby's throat.
Right, yeah.
But a lot of people argue you don't have that choice.
Yeah, you're already going to be, it's either determined or predetermined, depending on all the
Yeah.
It is tricky because then, yeah, it does bring in the question of like, is the guy actually making an evil choice? He's deciding to do this malevolent thing or causing suffering in another. Or is he just on another version of autopilot? Is he just, you know, he's just fulfilling the code that's gone on?
Well, nobody calls the mother bear evil that kills a 6-year-old between the mother bear and the cub.
Mm.
That's just the bear's nature.
Yeah.
No one's going to say the bear is evil. That's the bear's nature, that the bear has no choice. That's how it behaves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it sucks to think that might be how it is with humans, that we don't have a choice in some of these cases. It sucks to think that there's people out there that could be chopping off heads any moment if only they could get that magic pill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it throws a huge wrench in all of these types of discussions.
Yeah, for sure. I guess maybe in some ways that's also the environment issue, right? Like we build our environments and then our environments build us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do have to maybe question some of the things that we're presuming, you know, in terms of like, oh no, like, you know, the prison is the best system to make these problems go away or to solve things. Well, maybe it turns out not to. Maybe the environment's the problem here.
Yeah. Well, the prison is just a new environment. Yeah, it's something that bothers me sometimes. I mean, ultimately, I have to believe that I have choice, and I have to believe that because I think it increases the likelihood that I do. If I choose not to believe it, it's even more likely that I'll just become a worse person. That's what I suspect. Right? I suspect I'll be a better person if I believe I have that choice. Much like I believe that if I believe that God is love and we should love each other or whatever the Christian ideals are, there's a higher chance that I will behave that way than if I think that that's ridiculous and not possible. And I'll just be a better person to those around me, even if it's not true. You know, the old porcupine story, right? If you believe a porcupine is going to throw its quills at you, which is not true, right? You're more likely to not get hurt by porcupines.
Yeah, I'm going to stay 10 feet away from porcupines. I've never had a porcupine quill.
Yeah. I don't think they can actually throw them 10 feet, but I'm doing it anyway, you know?
Well, I'm going to test this theory. I'm going to go within 2 feet of the porcupine.
Yeah, so sometimes it just seems like even against the odds, I'm going to try my best to believe a thing, you know? Is one of the questions I wanted to ask you about actually was like, what do you think the cost is to disposing of the metaphysical? You talk about it, and I can throw something your way first or not, but you talk about it a bit in your book, throw it different places, but there's going to be a cost to doing it and a cost to not doing it. Either way, you're going to pay something.
That's a hell of a way to frame it, and I don't think I have an answer. Kind of a bit like the free will and the determinism or whatever kind of conversation. Human beings have this amazing ability to ask questions that you can only ever really answer from a view from above or from a godlike perspective kind of thing. And so I'm always kind of a little scared of the idea of like, you know, even does God exist as like, you know, framed in that way? There's no way we can actually answer that in a human form because we almost have to take on a God perspective to be able to say, oh yeah, there's a God right here. The only answer that comes to mind is probably we can't just dispense with the metaphysical, whatever it is. But if we have a better attitude towards mystery, then we can negotiate what we're sacrificing. We can negotiate maybe the costs and say, like, it's maybe that difference between saying, I'm willing to sacrifice something for what I righteously know, or I don't know. I'm actually not in a position where I can even answer that, but I'm willing to take up a responsibility to alleviate whatever suffering I can. Now, on the metaphysical side, again, I always run into that word, that mystery element. And even with the Song of Faith, I start the book kind of at the beginning, a little chunk out of the Song of Faith. God is holy mystery. Maybe that's where we're just always stuck with. And if we want to make metaphysical claims, and yet we have no way other than argument to work them, then I'm personally not interested in that, because I find I just don't get anywhere with those conversations. But if it's a matter of saying, well, what responsibility can we take up in the face of a mystery, then I'm maybe a little more curious. I'm curious to see how humans handle that, living with a mystery next door.
That's nice. I like that. That's actually an attempt at a real answer. I tend to go to the two opposites and then just try to mull around in the middle somewhere. But I do agree with that. Mystery is hugely important to me, and I could phrase it like this, I suppose. Wolverine from the X-Men.
Nice.
And, also was a great character when I was a kid. They put out a limited series with Frank Miller and Chris Claremont, and eventually he got his own comic book run, and he showed it up in a lot of other, and became a very famous character. And I watched the whole thing happen, right? Okay.
From like this niche, off in the way kind of margin guy
to this hugely famous Hugh Jackman plays him in the movies guy.
Yeah.
Right? And when we were kids, we didn't know his origin story, right? It wasn't like Batman or Superman or any of those other people. You didn't know his origin story. It was a mystery, right? What happened to him? How did he get regeneration? Why are his bones covered in metal, adamantium? How the hell did that happen? Except for this supposedly one spot on the base of his neck somewhere. There was all these things. We didn't know how any of this had happened, right? And then one day they put out a book called Origins, where you can read Wolverine's origins. And I don't know anybody that read it. Like, no one really cared. It wasn't reviewed that well. And I still haven't read it to this day, and I have no interest in reading it. The character was more interesting when the mystery was there. And then years later, they tried to fill as many little roles as they could as they saw how popular the character was getting. And like, oh, he needs an origin story. No, that's what made him stand out from the other characters to us. Is that he didn't have an origin story. That was the mystery, and we liked it.
With the Star Wars Solo movie that came out a couple of years back, one of the big high complaints, right, very, very early, very quick, seemed to be you're answering too many of these things that were, just quirky little things that could have been fine. Why did you try to solve everything, or why did you try to,
Yeah, now it's not myth anymore.
Now it's not myth anymore.
People can point out exactly what happened. Oh, here's what that means. People used to argue about the parsecs thing because the way that it was phrased, right? It didn't sound like, I can't remember how it was phrased, but either it didn't sound like a time or it didn't sound like a distance or something. And people were trying to figure out how the hell, that would work. And the movie explains everything. How all of it works now, right?
Yeah.
Some people like that, but it sort of feels like they had a checklist. Here's a thing he referenced. Here's a thing he referenced. We have to fill in all of these, connect all of these dots, right? Yeah. But it's more fun. There's a book where Frank Miller and Will Eisner talk to each other about comic books, and Will Eisner asks him, Frank, what his favorite thing about comics is, and he says it's the panel between two lines. I might have posted it before. Because that's where your brain has to do a thing. Daredevil's like this, and now he's way up there. What the hell happened between those two panels, right? And the reader fills in those spaces, right?
Maybe that's actually the problem again with this idea of the origin stories and the Han Solo explaining it all out. But you're removing the audience from participating more and more and more.
Yes, exactly.
In some ways, our obsession with theaters right now, our obsession with screens, like it's always this step of like removing the participation of the audience more and more and more. Like
it's getting cooler and cooler and cooler.
Oh, very nice. Yes, it's the McLuhan element where, as a result, there's this really strange kind of, say if you take a religious ritual, of anything really, it seems to originate more in the person doing the ritual to put them in the right frame of mind so that they've got the right, consciousness while in the moment, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be where a lot of rituals begin. But then when you congregate people, there's this progression where, okay, we're going to have the choir now in this institution be the singers. The audience is going to listen and just watch, sort of thing.
Mm.
Maybe you'll sing 3 or 4 times in the hour, and then you'll go away, kind of deal.
Yeah, but only a line someone sang first.
And now we've got to the point now where it's like, it's almost a control thing where we want the audience to do nothing. Just keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, but don't even react. Like, like there was this kind of stuff. I've been in a couple theaters, where people would clap at the end, or where there'd be like, the oohs and
yes. Seems weird, doesn't it?
Like, it's been a while since I've been in a theater, but I would never even dream of clapping at the end of a movie.
Yeah, I've always found it weird too. I was trained early on though, but I mean, I read those accounts of what it was like to show African tribes film and how they would scream and throw things at it. And even in Western society, when they first started showing film, one of the things they did, I think it was in America, they had these people come in and they had a huge train coming towards the camera. And all the people ran out of the theater.
I think it was the French brothers, but it's like a perspective shot where the train into the platform.
Yeah, and people ran out of the thing because it's like that is the natural. We've trained ourselves to be more passive.
Yeah,
and
we've been able to observe more. So maybe this comes down to it's not a metaphysical thing, sacrificing or holding it, but now just in our senses, we seem to be making an unconscious or conscious choice where we're saying we're taking ourselves out, we're participating less, but we're observing more because for some reason we value the observing side more.
Mm-hmm. We value the eye over the ear.
Maybe, yeah. Okay. There.
Right.
Is that okay? Are we okay with just spending that?
Well, I think it can lead to a very powerful, technologically powerful society at some point in time because there's an abstractness about it that's very powerful. But I'm not so sure how great it is to train yourself to not get out of the way of an oncoming train.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. If you are in serious danger, and it's not just an abstract, like if it's just sort of like an image painted on a screen compared to an actual thing, are we training kids to now jump out into traffic or something like that?
Well, yeah. So this is the kind of, and it's all metaphorical, of course, but maybe not. There is always that concern, right? So that's one of the reasons I do like Peterson, and I didn't plan on bringing him up either, but now I just did accidentally. But because he does love doing that, he loves skirting around the edges of society, looking for babies we've thrown out with our old bathwater. And I kind of like that idea of like a mad scientist scrambling around on the outside, like, hey, I think maybe you've left this out here for no good reason. We can still use it,
Yeah.
We need those types of people because as long as we are like training ourselves to not get out of the way of the oncoming train, because there's huge value in being able to stand there and watch it. We do need to still pay attention to those old modes of being,
Yeah. And like Marshall McLuhan, then, can we educate ourselves so that we can have a foot in both worlds, maybe? Where we can say, when it's time to observe and when it's time to learn how to observe, I can totally do that. I can catch on.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's time to actually act and participate and be in the world, can I do that as well? Can I have that choice?
Yeah, it seems like you're asking for the best of both worlds, and that might be a lot to ask for. But I mean, we can hope.
Well, education is always ambition, I guess.
I try to play that game. Like, can I do that? Can I continue to be a literate man and still be digital man at the same time? You know, is it possible for me to walk over there, play video games, come here, read a book, talk to you over long distances, and then go play my acoustic guitar? Do all those things exist in the same world? You know, and I suppose they do, but all of them are changed.
Yes.
You know, I'm never going to play guitar the way people played guitar 40 years ago. It's just not possible. I've seen too much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know,
the way we learn even is different because we're learning on a screen at this point now.
Yeah, everything's changed. So all the little things, you know, the same thing feels different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the act of going down to get an ice cream cone at the ice cream parlor is different now because I have all these images in my mind of like, oh, that this is a nostalgic thing now. It's not a current thing. It feels old fashioned, right?
Yes.
The simplest little things are still changed just by the fact that the whole world has changed. It's one of those medium is the message things that is people get that stumbling block of like, oh, really? It doesn't matter whether I'm watching a rape video or something about helping children. And you're like, no, the content obviously matters too, right? Clearly the content can be drastically different between something wonderful and something evil, no doubt about that. But the way, like, if you get too hung up on that, you're missing out on the larger picture of how clearly the fact that we all can watch things in our home is more important than the individual thing you happen to be watching tonight.
Yeah, that's where, like, culture is changing, I mean, almost regardless in that way, because we now have a device that brings both to you, like, all at once, simultaneously. We're not choosing necessarily maybe to see like the horrific, violent thing and the beautiful, life-affirming thing. We're seeing them both at once.
All the time.
All the time. It's all
right.
on.
I remember the ticker tape thing. They had remember they brought about the ticker tape below the news because there wasn't enough news on the news, so they had to add more news to the news by putting more news in the bottom.
And that became like a thing. Hey, we have more headlines than any other news outfit. We have 17 headlines per minute or something. Like way too much quantity.
Well, and at first it sort of made sense because it would be like they'd be talking about something. Oh, you know, the Maple Leafs lost last night, chances are. And then below it would be like, oh, breaking news, some horrible thing happened somewhere. And it would be like for an important news, you know. No, it's actually not important that I know some horrible, like a car bomb went off in Chile or something. It's like I'm not going to change the patterns of my day. But whatever,
it's the emotional grip again, right? Like
that's how they sell news. So bleeds it leads. That's the stuff they put on the ticker tape. But then there was less news, and so they would still use the ticker tape. And then they'd be talking about something, and then at the bottom it would say, like, you know, Beyonce says she doesn't like the word bootylicious. And you're like, well, how is that so important that you have to throw it on the ticker tape? It doesn't seem like that big a deal. You know, like, I don't even think it would belong on the normal news. Never mind that we have to know while we're watching the regular news that she doesn't like this. I never liked the word bootylicious before. It never made the news.
Yeah.
You know,
maybe that's again back to your idea of like, you know, the content. Sure, the content matters, but at the same time, the medium is having its way with you. And
either way.
Yeah.
Yeah, regardless. And on everything you do, everything. Like I read comics differently now because I can compare them to like what it was like reading on an iPad, you know. Everything's going to be different. You know, taking my kid to a comic book store felt really strange. And when we go in there, because he tries to get regular comics, and when we go in there to get the comics, you know, at first he was blown away. He'd never seen anything like this because kids don't go to comic book stores anymore.
And it's all physical, right? It's laid out. And you have to physically search.
Oh, he was in tactile heaven because he doesn't get that kind of experience normally, right? All the browsing he does is all e-browsing. So he doesn't know what it's like to see like pull out the Mylar bag, the other one, oh, here's one behind, another one behind, and see them all there and touch them, right? It's a completely different experience.
Yeah.
And I could see he was having a kind of heaven that he didn't know before, right? And now we go there somewhat regularly to have that actual experience. I'm trying really hard not to buy things online anymore. Like I go to the actual bookstore, I try to, you know, and if I can't get the book I want, I just don't. I talk about it in the episode, as you know.
Yeah.
I just don't bother. I just deal with whatever book I can get. You know, that's what they had at the store. That's what I'm reading. You know, so be it. or the library. Like the sense of entitlement that this modern world creates, that's what I didn't really consider. You know, it spoils all children that their favorite show is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, and as a result, because you have everything all at once, anytime, there's a loss of meaning or something like.
For sure.
There's no anticipation and build up to it. There's no like trying to work through the day or whatever. Like, you know, I'm going to go to bed early on a Friday so I can get up to watch my Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, because they're on Friday night. So what do you care?
Yeah,
right? They're on always. They're always on, right? And somebody was debating with me about watching esports because my kid likes to watch other people play video games and talk into a camera. I tried to sell him on the notion like, hey, your dad likes to play video games. How about we shut this off? You set up a chair and just watch me. It'd be great. No, did not fly. Right. So that's a no-go. But so I was talking to this other guy and he says, well, what's the big deal? You like to watch boxing or hockey or whatever. What's the difference between, you know, watching a football game and your kid watching these esports? And I was like, what I said to him was like, well, each team has 18 games a year, maybe 17, I think now. You know, the content is rationed out to you. It's regulated in a certain way. This is how much content there's going to be over the course of a season. Then there's a long break and you have to wait again for the next one. Especially if you like to watch people play video games, you can do it 24/7. They release videos every day. They all do. And there's 80 million of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Especially with something like football where there is a skill element to it and there's also a physical impact.
Mm-hmm.
Like
I tried to avoid mentioning that to the guy because I knew he was expecting that, but you're right. It is a huge difference as well too.
Yeah.
But I tried.
There is some tie to the material world, let's say, or the out there world. Whereas with video games, it's like, well, I'm tired of this expert winning. I'm going to go look at that expert winning.
Yeah.
That expert winning. So like, it's all very, it's again, all at once.
And at what point are you spending too much of your life abstracted, right? I remember, talking with people about this issue and say, oh, you know, playing violent video games doesn't have any impact on me. And I was like, okay, hold on here. I get it doesn't make you go out and kill people. And then that's ridiculous, and I'm not going to make that argument. But any impact? Doesn't have any impact? You mean whether or not you spend 8 hours a day playing Call of Duty or practicing violin, you're the same person in hour 9? Regardless? I highly doubt that. You can choose what to do with your day, how you're going to create yourself, what you're going to do with yourself, and what kind of person you become at the end of each day. You can choose those things. And I suspect that choosing a video game has a huge impact on who you're going to be at the end of that day. And if you choose that every day, you'll be a very different person than lots of other people I know who choose mountain biking or swimming or playing a guitar or painting a picture or who knows what, right?
Yeah.
Never mind. That's not even getting into the issue of what they do when they play the game. And if when they play the game, they're killing civilians and driving around in a city, which granted is not most games, but if that's what they're doing, I think that that's a different activity than if you're playing Katamari, where you make giant balls for the god kings up in space. Like it's a different thing. And that also will have a different result at the end of whatever hours you spend doing that thing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yes.
Anytime I have that argument, I start there. There's some difference. So what is it?
Beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I hate to say this, but I do have a date after 3:00.
Yeah, it is 2 hours. That's what you had said, I think, in the message. So we'll end here. That's fine. And I think we got some good stuff out of this, potentially.
It was fun.
It was fun. I had a good time. I laughed a lot. I don't know how useful it is for other people, but I had a good time. We could always chat more if we have to get more details on the book, which is fine. But it was a great time chatting with you. Congratulations on the book, although it's been a little while now since you put it out. Are you working on a second one?
I've got some ideas. I'm scared to start. I totally admit I am scared to start because I know what went into that one. And I'm not sure if I want to, take it up again.
Well, short of having an actual daughter, your next best bet is a book.
I'll put no comment on that.
You know,
I better
I
not.
just mean like,
Yeah.
it's a good thing. It's a good thing to put out in the world. If you have other ideas, maybe I could help you out with something. Who knows? But and it felt very Canadian. Not only are you mentioning a lot of Canadian intellectuals and whatnot, but did you do some kind of interdisciplinary studies?
Not formally, but like I was interested, and I ended up going down that pattern.
I think academia was going through that movement when we were of age.
Yeah.
Right? It's so much of my generation and time. Right? It really resonated well with me because like the type of schooling you were doing, the type of culture and whatnot, it's right imprinted there in the book. And that's a great thing to have imprinted in there. Like when I read Mordecai Richler, I'm brought back to Montreal from his time period. I'm brought back to the Jewish quarters of Quebec that he grew up in.
Yeah.
And when I read this, even though you're not trying to do that, it takes me to a certain time in Canada and in Canadian intellectual life.
There may have been a couple tragically hip CDs in and out of the player while working on this. But that's the poet side. That's like the...
Right, yeah. Well, there was the other thing I forgot to mention, too, was that what I didn't expect, because I know your posts well enough to roughly know what to expect, but what I didn't expect was that you would be so poetic in there. There's lots of very poetic moments in the book.
Mm. Oh, I'm not poetic in Facebook. I guess I'm more to the trying to
Well,
get...
who is? Yeah, Facebook's not the place for poetry.
That's a quote for it. That's a keeper of a quote right there. Poets abandon Facebook.
Yeah. I don't know what it's the place for. I honestly use it just to practice my own writing. And I know it sounds selfish and horrible, but I don't know how else to engage with it.
No.
Any other way, I lose my mind. So I have to just see it as like, this is like a little democratic way for me to test ideas, then go back, look them over again. Maybe if the democracy part works, maybe not, but I still get some ideas when I look over it again. I see people respond. I get ideas. Okay, I should fix this, or like, I literally use it as a battleground for that stuff.
When was it, like 20 years ago or so? Maybe not 20 years ago, maybe more 15. I kind of got into that blogosphere thing. Things were changing with the oh, you can do WordPress blog, you can do Blogspot blogs, all that stuff.
That was great.
And it was like, wow, this is incredible, and I jumped on board, and it was like fun. But then, kind of quickly into it, I realized like, oh, this is just practice writing. Like this.
Yes.
You can try to go pro and all that, and that's fine. But it's really sort of an element more of like, it's public practice, and you'll get a little bit of feedback from the people that that are contending with the same stuff or whatever here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certainly not. And in some ways, that's exactly what a writer needs. A writer, you don't just write and like you're perfect automatically. You need all those like you're wrong, change.
I still have old lines of my poetry from high school that were so bad. Me and my friends still quote them to each other just to make fun of how much I sucked when I was younger. Yeah.
Now okay, that could be our next conversation where when poetry becomes like inside jokes.
Oh yeah, I got lots to say on that one.
A whole bunch of teenage poetry is really that search for an inside joke with somebody else.
Oh, it's great. My buddy ended up having a party. It was a teenage poetry party. We're all adults and we all had to improvise a bad goth poem in front of each other. So what else did the world is dark. We have to like just go around the room.
Now if you record that would have
It was really fun, man. It was really, really fun. Awesome. Anyways, great time. It's 3:01 now where you are, so go do your thing. Have a great time. Sorry to hold you back. Good chatting with you.
Actually, one extra thing.
Sure, yeah. I'm not in a rush, so.
I find self-promotion hell, as you know, and I've stumbled around.
Buy the book.
Yeah! No, I was going to say, I've got promo codes, essentially, for Audible, for the audiobook.
Okay.
And I've got promo codes for if somebody's using the iBooks app. So what I could do is if anybody on your YouTube channel, let's say. So we'll narrow it down to the YouTube channel.
Yeah, like the 5 people that watch it probably.
If anybody says, oh, I use Audible or whatever, we can give them a promo code.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll put it up in the group too, and we'll see what we can do. I might even record a separate intro for you.
Okay.
You know, like separate from this. If you could send me like one of those lame bios you have to write on yourself, you know the ones? Yeah. I hate them. I really hate them.
I've got them. I had to write them.
Yeah, if you could send me one of those, I'll try to stumble through it or something like that and give a little intro.
Excellent. Yeah, we kind of just jumped in and started having fun.
Yeah, whatever. So what? I've not done this before, but I've seen them, and they almost never look that professional.
Oh, don't worry, man. I'm as professional as hell.
I tried. I actually considered changing my clothes. I was like, should I put on a different shirt, do my hair? I was like, well, I decided to wear a hat and not put on a different shirt. But I did move into the house to get better internet, so, you know, that's something.
Piece by piece, right?
Yeah, okay.
Have an awesome weekend.
Yourself as well, sir. Thanks for the good times. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.